Imagine you were a warrior from the moment you were born, loyal only to the state. Whilst Athens will always be remembered as the Greek center of the arts, philosophy, and education, Sparta was home to the ancient world's most elite warriors. If you were born ill or handicapped in Sparta, you'd be thrown into the wilderness, and life got even harsher as you grew. But how difficult was it really to live as a Spartan? And would you have survived these treacherous conditions? Let's find out today in Newfound History. While pop culture tends to minimize Spartans to jacked, male-only caricatures of people who only love to fight and argue, the truth is that Spartans were devoted to the state more than they were to their families. Once a child was born, it would be taken to a council of elders known as the Gerousia. It was composed of 2 Spartan kings and 28 men over 60, known as Gerontes. Pray to the gods that your son was not born weak, as he would have been deemed useless to the Spartan army and more useful as food for the wolves. Children fared better if born a girl, as infanticide didn't apply to them. Those who passed the test were returned to their families. Rest assured, things only got harder. Male Spartans were given one job offer for the rest of their lives: being a soldier. Military training began at age 7 as soon as they left home and entered a rigorous training program known as the agoge, of which only the firstborn son of the ruling houses was exempt. In the agoge, hazing was the norm. Instructors would intentionally taunt trainees to start arguments between them. At the same time, during some state ceremonies, girls would sing mocking songs of the young men of the agoge to shame them. The children weren't given footwear until age 7. The idea was to make their feet so hard with calluses that they could march for miles under any condition. They were subjected to frequent physical competitions, generally involving violence. The food rations were terrible. They'd be given broth, bread, and maybe some meat if they were lucky. The expectation was that they'd become skilled enough at stealing food, foraging, and other survival skills if they were put in a desperate situation. If they got caught while stealing, they'd be beaten harshly. The lesson here was that they should steal if necessary, just never get caught in the act. Spartans believed that a well-rounded individual was a better soldier, so both males and females were taught reading, writing, and mathematics from a young age. Unlike their Athenian counterparts, the Spartans dismissed any interest in the arts of philosophy. Historians are sure there were certain warriors with an artistic vein here and there, yet since their entire society was conditioned around war, creative education was practically non-existent. It was all geared towards war, developing battle strategies, honing their minds, and learning survival skills. No need for theaters or architecture when you were busy sharpening spears. Chief among the brutal practices against the young Spartan males were the contests of endurance, where teenagers were flogged while facing an altar at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia. This was a religious ritual known as diamastagosis, a test of the boys' bravery and resistance to pain. With time, the practice was corrupted as Sparta declined, and by the time the Romans took over, it had become a blood sport that tourists could cheer on as others were flogged. The teenagers who showed the most leadership skill were selected to participate in the Crypteia, a secret police force in charge of keeping the helot populations in check and assassinating potential threats. More on the helots later. At age 20, all Spartan males became full-time soldiers, deployable in battle at a moment's notice, and remained on active duty until age 60, if they could survive that long. Once the Spartan boy turned into a man, he could participate in the Syssitia, a military mess hall where other Spartans gathered for public meals. The rations here were slightly better than the children's. They were given black broth, which consisted of meat cooked in blood and seasoned with vinegar and salt. Each member only received a small portion, along with more generous amounts of barley bread, some wine, and a course of cheese, figs, and olives. Spartans lived in simple houses made of mud brick. At home, they ate a basic diet of grains, vegetables, and meat, with the occasional luxury of cheese or fruit. They had a strong sense of community, and marriage was important to Spartans. If you fathered many sons, you'd be greatly rewarded, while delaying marriage brought shame. Could you imagine what awaited infertile men or women? Married life was rife with problems. Men under 30, when not at war, which, in fact, was a lot of the time, lived lived in a communal barracks, and to see their wives, their only option was to sneak away at night. Not a great recipe for a healthy relationship. Overweight citizens were particularly loathed and risked being banished from Sparta. Not all was equal in ancient Sparta. The elite Spartan soldiers, known as the Spartiates, were at the top of the social ladder and enjoyed the most privileges. Below them were the perioikoi, free citizens who were not part of the elite military class. These were all foreigners, traders, and blacksmiths who produced the weapons for the Spartiate. They served in the military but weren't warriors, instead being tasked with trade and communication while warring. They were taxpayers and had the right to hold lands, yet what was it like for the lowest members of ancient Sparta? At the bottom of the social order came the Helots. The Helots were either Greeks who came from Laconia and Messenia. They were conquered by the Spartans and enslaved. In fact, Helots means captives. Not a great name, huh? Spartans entrusted the Helots with handling day-to-day tasks and unskilled labor to keep things running in society. These included farmers, household servants, nurses, and military attendants. Obviously, the Helots weren't happy living this way. Who would be? The Spartans treated them brutally by humiliating them in private and in public. Self-control was among a Spartan's most prized traits, and to show youngsters how a Spartan should never act, they'd force Helots to drink wine until they could barely stand. The Helots would be mocked and beaten for their actions or even killed for petty reasons, such as being too bright or physically fit. You seriously did not want to be a Helot in Spartan society. Getting drunk destroyed the image of a Spartan. Yet, the ultimate disgrace was cowardice, more specifically, to surrender in battle. You see, Spartans were expected to fight without fear and to the death of the last man standing. Laying down arms was a non-option, and Spartan mothers would send their sons off to war with a nonchalant order of returning with their shield or on the shield. Speaking about mothers, what about the Spartan women? Obviously, they had an essential role in society, that of bearing and raising children. A woman bearing children was considered on the same level of importance as a male warrior in the Spartan army. In fact, they were famous because they had more freedom than most women in the world at that time. They had no military role, but still received a formal education, although it was separate from boys and not in boarding schools. Girls had their own version of physical training, but it focused on learning how to ride horses, throwing the discus and javelin, and running. Females engaged in athletic competitions such as wrestling, javelin throwing, singing, and dancing. Adult Spartan women were also allowed to manage property. An interesting fact about them is that they were not expected to handle domestic responsibilities. Can you guess why? Because cooking, cleaning, and household tasks were handled by the Helots. That's also another reason why marriage was so crucial to Spartans. The state pressured women to have children who'd grow up to be soldiers and take the place of the fallen in battle. Marriage ceremonies had some interesting customs. Women shaved their heads and kept their hair short after the wedding. Due to their focus on war, Spartans did not mind peaceful rituals. The largest on their yearly calendar was the Gymnopedia. Naked men and women would war dance, sing, and celebrate the god Apollo for several days. The focus of the celebration was a competition of young men nearing adulthood, and its purpose was to help develop Spartan identity. Oddly enough, even rituals around death were seen as unimportant. Tombstones and graves weren't common, and only women who died in childbirth or men who died in battle were worthy of receiving one. Sparta produced some of the finest warriors of ancient history. Would you have been able to keep up in such military-focused society? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for watching this episode of Newfound History.